Assalamu alaikum everyone, and thank you Brother Raza for kind introduction, and thank you everybody for joining today. I think most of you see me as moderating these presentations, and I'm very happy to see that, say after about 10 months or almost 11 months, that I'm coming back to speak here, which means that we are having these events every 2 weeks. So since the last 22 weeks or so, other people are presenting, and uh, and that's a great thing because initially when we started mine, I was the only presenter for first couple of months, boring people, and then we saw new people coming up and presenting here, and now Alhamdulillah, the calendar is pretty full in terms of people who have expressed interest in presenting on these bi-weekly presentations. And that's not to discourage anybody from coming up to present. Please, if you have some good topics in mind, please do come forward, and inshallah it will be great to see your participation too. So having said that, today I will be touching on a very contentious topic, a topic which basically has a very bipolar opinion in this world, both in terms of its critique and defense. So I will try to explore the reality of these things, try to keep it more objective, and see what we can take from these defenses and critiques. So here I'm managing about two computers here, so you might see me moving a little bit, getting confused a little bit, so apologies in advance. So let's see. All right, so why talk about capitalism now? So this was a topic that I've been thinking about for a while now, and thought we should have more conversations about it in an open-minded settings rather than taking one side or the other. I think we can all concur on the point that capitalism is a very dominant ideology of this world since last 3-4 centuries. And the term capitalist realism, coined by, I think, Zizek and many Marxists, and I think the last book that I read was Mark Fisher, used this terminology called capitalist realism. What it says is that it is easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. And there is a lot of truth to it. We can imagine that the world can end in n number of ways, say by a nuclear war, by an asteroid hitting the earth, by an extreme solar flare causing electricity disruption and like destroying the whole humanity, and many other things like pandemic that we saw. And right now it's not unimaginable to see how the world can end. But what is unimaginable is on how capitalism, which is so ingrained in our lives, will end. Despite so much criticism of capitalism, there has not been a solid alternative that's presented in its complete form from end to end. And sure, there are propositions about how to make system more ethical and moral, but the only extreme alternate form in the modern history, an experiment that was tried and which was totally opposite of capitalism, was communism. And unfortunately, that experiment failed in 90s, and right now we only have one system, capitalism, and its various flavors that exist in the modern world. So given its dominant nature, it is important to look at both its current defenses and critiques. What are the problems of capitalism, and what are its benefits, and what are its features? I would keep this presentation open, so once in a while if you have a question, we can pause inshallah and we can discuss it. But in interest of time, I think we can save the back and forth discussion or follow-up questions towards the end of the session. Okay, so the status quo that I've already mentioned is the extremity of opinions, and many of these opinions are basically derived from cherry picking certain aspects of capitalism. So what it does is it kind of leads to, it kind of misleads to into thinking, into coming up with different ideas which are kind of not true. And people, being not so well read, often take things on face value and go by that. And what that does is that it creates an unnecessary psychological block in mind from participating in the system and benefiting from it. And on the other hand, it also creates another set of psychological block where a person starts to defend every aspect of capitalism by calling it as natural and legitimate. So on one hand, we see the free market capitalist writings, a book like the one that I have listed here, Elizabeth Ames, where they describe capitalism as the greatest accomplishment in the history of mankind, and that it is only force that frees the democratic system and create a free and moral society. And then we have, excuse me, other critiques who take the extreme position saying that capitalism was designed to fail us. And then we have Marxist critique of the system, and we see very similar critiques in Islamic circles that call capitalism as the greatest bane for the humanity. So these are the very extreme opinions that exist in our popular discourse. In academic discourse also, there's a lot of polarization, but it is more balanced and not emotional. So the objective of this presentation is basically to clear up some of the things that are being discussed in a mainstream discourse. We are not going into an academic paradigm in critiquing and defending capitalism. Okay, so before we go into capitalism, we have to discuss the essential component of capitalism, and that is the capital. So capital in economics can be defined as a productive resource which can be used to generate goods and services. And one of the main objective of this is the creation of wealth and further growth. And I have listed few forms of capital here. It can be of multiple forms. There are 6 that I have listed here. And the first is the natural resources, the oils, the minerals, and now the rare earth metals that we see in different parts of the world, even in those parts of the world where capitalism doesn't exist. For example, like Venezuela, which is particularly against the capitalistic thinking, but owns oil in abundance. So this form of capital can exist regardless of people's ideology. And most of the capitalist nations go after these nations which possess resources in order to make deals, or if the worst form is to occupy them for the sake of capital. And then we have physical capital. The physical capital is like the machines and computers and state-of-art tools. And then we have human capital, which are composed of people who operate these machines and are engaged as service providers. So that's what constitutes the human capital. Then we have the financial capital for undertaking productive endeavors. We need finances to carry out production or provide services. That's how it's been in this world since time immemorial, for employing somebody to buy natural resources, to buy physical capital. All of this needs financial capital. And then in the post-industrial revolution world, authorities have also developed mechanism to store what can be called as the intellectual capital in the form of patents, royalties, inventions, and trade secrets. These are the output of human innovation in the form of proprietary formulas, ideas, in high-tech world standards. These are all encapsulated in the intellectual property. And then there is another thing that is very rarely talked about, which is the social capital. This is the trust which individuals and actors have among themselves, like how much a person can trust another person or the market mechanism. Let's say even in a preliminary society, for example, a vegetable market is based on some form of trust. If I have to buy a vegetable from a vendor, then should I give money first or wait till they hand over the vegetable? I mean, that's a very important thing. If the vendor takes the money and says, "Oh, you didn't give me any money," then it results in a chaos, a breakdown of the market trust. And what that means is this kind of society has a very low level of trust. What that means is that the government has to enforce a lot of regulations in order to build up the trust. And absence of that of the trust regulations can lead to chaos. So that's why social capital is one of the most precious things for the society, because that determines how much enforcement is needed and how much growth is possible in a society. And it also has to do with the moral aspect of the society and how people, how much corruption is there in the society, and this has also got to do a really strong relationship with the religiosity. Okay, so coming to capitalism now, there are multiple definitions of capitalism, and each definition basically depends on a certain lens. So the definition that I kind of find more objective is the classical definition, which is capitalism is an economic system in which private individuals own productive assets and they use it to produce things which are useful for the society, and this economic activity is organized around open markets. And the pursuit of profit through competition and voluntary exchange drives the growth. So there's a classical definition of economics, which I find is it describes it's more a positivist definition rather than a value judgment. Then there are many other definitions which exist based on the lens that you deploy. For example, you have the Marxist definition based on class relations, Schumpeterian definition focused on innovation, and there are definitions through institutional lenses, and there are multiple other lenses. But there is another definition which is kind of important, which is in the context of political economy. The definition is capitalism is a system where private individuals, corporation own the means of production, and they are driven by profit with market mechanisms, supply and demand, determining prices and resource allocation, all within an institutional framework, that is laws, properties and rights, shaped by political authorities involving complex power dynamics and varying degree of government intervention. So political economy is all about the nexus between politics and economics. So regardless of the lens, there are few things which are like the cornerstones and the pillars of capitalism, and are universal in definitions across various lenses of the multiple lenses that I'm listing here. The first is the private ownership. The second is the motivation, which is the profit. The existence of market and competition. And so with these essential components, we can have different flavors of capitalism depending on how these components are controlled. Then we can talk a little bit about lenses, because these lenses lead us into critiques and defenses of capitalism. First, we have the liberalism lens, which basically focuses on freedom, the pro-market nature of capitalism, the specializations, the division of labor, and the efficiency. So it emphasizes basically on how capitalism brings improvement in quality of life and comforts, and usually justifies all the problems that arises from it by saying that the benefits outweigh the harms. Then on the other extreme, we have Marxist lens, which basically defines capitalism to be very exploitative and dividing society into classes of unequal ownership. So it's a very has a very negative perspective about the capitalism, at least of that time. And then we have people that define it through the lens of financial markets. And with this lens, people kind of ignore the process of production and consumption, and their main focus is what does financial market do to the economy, and what does the economy do to the financial market. So their center of attention is financial markets, and economy is considered as like a one huge block which interacts with the financial markets. Then there is the institutional lens, which often goes into the realm of political economy, which examines capitalism through institutions that manage it and make it the key to a good and bad outcome. It also studies the nexus between politics and economics, like I talked about. And in my view, there's a lot of value in learning about this lens. And then there is a developmental capitalist lens, which concerns itself with the development of poor and underdeveloped countries, and how capitalism can be made to improve the living standards and economies of poor countries. And then we have the sociological, moral, and cultural lens, which mostly emphasizes the impact of capitalism on society and and culture. It depends. It lands up in the domain of value system and norms, and proposes reform and critiques the capitalism. And then we have the welfare lens, which talks about how to work towards the welfare of the society in a capitalistic framework. This includes views of John Rawls, Michael Lind, John Maynard Keynes, the Keynesian view, and such. Then we have advanced lenses, which are like a right battleground between economists, the neoclassicals, the Keynesians, the Schumpeterians, and the new Schumpeterians. But these are focused on narrow role of entities like state, free market, innovation, etc., in the society as well as in the economy. So each lens basically tries to define capitalism in a certain way by focusing on certain aspects. And to me, it almost looks like people who cannot see, I mean, people who are blind trying to describe an elephant. So these different lenses can become the foundation of many critiques and defenses of capitalism, and often can lead to some form of confusion when we basically brand the whole system as excellent or worst. Um, Before we get into the defense and critique of capitalism, I want to briefly walk through its major stages. Capitalism is not a single static thing that has stayed same forever, but it has evolved over centuries, and that evolution really matters for how we judge it today. Um, in some sense, element of capitalism has existed for a very long time. Humans have always traded. In ancient times, people exchanged goods and used a primitive form of money like seashells that archaeologists are still discovering. And these seashells are found deep inland, which means that basically there was a trade that went on between the coastal areas and deep inland, like Central Asia, which doesn't have access to beaches. So basic form of commerce has always been present. Over the time, the pre-modern commerce evolved. Medieval and early Middle Ages trade gradually transformed into what we can call as the colonial capitalism. Later, with the Industrial Revolution, we moved into industrial capitalism, that is followed by corporate or monopoly capitalism, and then Keynesian or welfare capitalism, then neoliberal capitalism. We'll see all of that in a moment. One thing I want to highlight here is the period roughly from 1700 to 1750 CE. That is when things really started to change in a way that was not seen in the human history in the past, and that was mainly because of the industrialization. On this slide, I am using a table from Thomas Piketty's book, Capital in 21st Century. It shows three things, evolution of three things over time. The growth of total world output, growth of world population, and growth of output per capita. Before 1700, the world output grew at about 0.1% per year, and the population also grew at roughly about 0.1%. So, in other words, almost all the increase in the total output came simply from growth in human population and not from higher productivity. For the average person, life was basically stagnant for centuries, and the means of productions were changing, but they were changing at a very, very small pace, less than 0.1%. However, after 1700, that changed dramatically with the rise of mechanization, steam engines, and later electricity and oils. The world output started to grow. It jumped a lot. The growth rate fluctuated over time, but the long trend is sharply upward. Population growth also accelerated after 1700 because living conditions began to improve and better access to medicine and sanitation facility improved. The life expectancy rose and population grew much faster than before. The crucial column is output per capita. That is what tells us whether what the average human being is producing. Per capita output began to rise significantly only after the industrial revolution, and that is why I'm putting an arrow here to show around this era of industrial capitalism. It marked the beginning of a truly systematic technological transformation of human life, and much of the effects what we see in our society happened from this era onwards. So let me come back and say a bit more about the phases that I described in the block diagram in the block in the previous slide. So even in medieval times, there were vibrant trades that existed between different parts of the world. Cities and regions exchanged goods, and there was rudimentary financial instrument that existed. By around 1100 CE, we see form of banking in places like Italy. This period also overlaps with the Crusades. The Crusaders traveled to Jerusalem, could not safely carry large amount of gold and silver, so they would deposit wealth in one city and carry a written certificate. They would cash that certificate in another city, and these early credit instruments became the foundation of later banking and the fiat money that we see right now. So the foundation of capitalism are already forming long before industrialization, but they are still on a relatively small and they are very localized to certain areas. And as oceanic exploration improved and European imperial project gathered momentum, especially after the conquest of America, we see the rise of colonial capitalism. In this stage, states-backed chartered companies like the East India Company, which you can think of as like the startup of the eras, these companies would manufacture ships, hire sailors, sail to new territories, claim land in the name of their kings, they colonize it and extract resources from those colonies. The focus in Americas, especially South America, for example, was on the gold and silver and other valuable raw material, which was then shipped back to Europe. And alongside this, we see another development, which is the slave trade, which was the brutal component that picked up momentum in starting from this colonial capitalism. There were multiple slave routes, trans-Saharan and transatlantic. And the transatlantic slave trade shipped Africans to the Americas. The trans-Sahara took it to the Asia. The transatlantic trade, in particular, became very closely tied to the emergence of the plantation economies and the colonial wealth, and was several order of magnitude more than trans-Saharan slave trade. Now from colonial capitalism, we transition into industrial capitalism. Here we see the discovery and use of steam engines, large-scale coal use, and later electricity. Production moved from small workshops into large factories, and this is the stage that produced a huge rise in output that I mentioned earlier. So industrialization basically changed societies in multiple ways. It increased. There was a massive increase in production. Then the rapid urbanization as people moved from rural areas into cities. New transportation networks, especially railways and later steamships, were developed to support commerce and move people and goods around. Colonialism continued in this phase, and colonies in this era served primarily as source of cheap raw material and as kept and as a markets for the finished good. This intensified colonialism because industrial power now need both input for in the form of raw material and markets to sell the finished good. As an example, many of us know that about the opium wars in China. The Qing emperor basically said that their celestial empire don't need any European product, but they were exporting stuff to Britain. So this creates a trade imbalance. So British industrial capitalism had created huge surplus of goods that needed market. So when China resisted, basically Britain used military force to pry open Chinese market, and this was a brutal humiliation phase for China, and Chinese historians often refer to this period as a century of humiliation. And this illustrates how capitalism was tied not to technology and productivity, but also to imperialism and coercion. Lenin's famous work titled Imperialism, the highest form of capitalism, captures some of the aspects of this form of this aspect of capitalism. Then industrial capitalism eventually evolved into corporate or monopoly capitalism. In this stage, we see the rise of very large corporation trusts and cartels. There was both horizontal and vertical integration of the companies. Horizontal integration means many small firms in the same industry group are merged into a single dominant company, whereas vertical integration means various steps in production chain from raw material to finished products are brought under one corporation. So that's the vertical integration. This begins in the first in the English-speaking Anglo-Saxon world, especially in the United States and the United Kingdom, and then spreads around to the rest of Europe, and then eventually to the rest of the world. Economic and political power became highly concentrated. There was a public backlash, and in early 20th century, American government introduced many antitrust laws to break up monopolies such as Standard Oils. In this, the newspapers of this era shows cartoons depicting figures like Rockefellers as giant serpents wrapped around the United States. Another transformation that happened in this era is the separation between ownership and control. In earlier stages, the owner was also the producer and manager. In corporate capitalism, owners become distant shareholder or large investor, and day-to-day decisions are made by professional managers and executives, not the shareholders. This creates a classic, and this creates what economists say the classic principal agent problem. The principals are the owner or the shareholders, and the agents are the executives and managers such as CEO who run the company. So agents are supposed to act in the best interest of the principal, but they often have their own incentives like bonus tied to short-term profits, stock price fluctuation, justifying the stock price fluctuation, and personal career goals. So this separation of ownership and control becomes a central feature of modern corporate governance, and creates many of the problems we see today in executive pay, the short-termism in terms of decisions, and corporate behavior. The next big shift happened after the roaring 20s, which resulted, roaring 20s were like people were just over investing in the corporate world, expecting miracles to happen, which eventually led to the crash of 1929 and the Great Depression that followed it. The pure laissez-faire capitalism, where the state and the private sectors are sharply separated, and the state is not expected to invest or create demand. It basically, what happens is there was state took a backseat here, and eventually this led to a huge collapse in financial markets, which in turn went into affected the main street in the form of mass unemployment and a deflationary cycle where basically people found it useful to keep the capital in cash instead of investing, because private actors were too scared to invest in either agriculture or industry. So many economists thought about it, and prominent among them, I would not say the first, but prominent among them was John Maynard Keynes, who argued that the state must step in such situations and spend when the private sector is paralyzed. So free market basically doesn't want government to interfere in it, but Keynes is arguing that the state must step in these situations and take the control. So in the United States, this led to something we call as the New Deal, where large public infrastructure works were undertaken to employ people, and what that does is it leads to spending of money and circulation of money in the economy. And it also created social welfare programs like Social Security that we see in the United States. And this era also saw more regulation of financial markets and bankings. So after World War II, which itself like caused massive destruction in Europe and Asia, state had to intervene even more to build infrastructure and support full employment. A kind of a mixed economy became the model now, and markets were important, but they are embedded now in strong welfare and regulatory framework. Then communism also played a big role here, because communism claims to represent workers and the poor, and capitalist countries adopted more welfare and worker protection in order to prevent the communist ideas from spreading further into Europe and the West. Then we come to 1970s, where a new shock, there were numerous shocks actually. The first was the collapse of the Bretton Woods Accord, which tied dollar to the gold standards. Now basically it and the relation kind of broke down, and fiat currency came into existence. Then there were a couple of oil crises and stagflations that happened in this time, and there was a rising deficit and the concern that growth is slowing. And this was it's a unique time, because after World War II, Europe, just after World War II, United States was the largest contributor to the GDP. But as European economies recovered, they started to claim their share, and the share of United States and Britain, which was less affected by World War II, began to drop. So what it did was created a sense of sentiment, especially in the United States and the UK, that the way out is to deregulate market and reduce the role of the state, and they began to embrace free market capitalism again. And this is the era of Ronald Reagan in the United States, and Margaret Thatcher in the United Kingdom. So this neoliberal phase involved like deregulation of finances and other sectors, privatization of state-owned enterprises, SOEs as they are called, weakening of unions, and a push for free trade and capital mobility. So by 1990s and 2000s, many countries started experiencing rising inequalities and repeated financial crises because of the neoliberal liberal principles. And the process culminated in 2008 global financial crisis, after which Keynesian and welfare capitalism is back again in trend, at least temporarily. And there were a lot of government bailouts and spendings to bring the Western economies out of the depression, out of the deflation that was going on after 2008. And now, currently, we can be described as living in an age which is like the digital or AI capitalism. Here, here the technology, the internet, and computing powers are central. Digital platforms mediate a huge share of economic and social life. Social media platforms and the business surrounding it like occupy a very big portion of the economy, and kind of the driver of the economy. And in terms of computing technologies, we have cloud computing and databases, e-commerce platforms, and there are emerging technologies like autonomous vehicle, which rely on massive data and computation. A defining feature of this stage is the network effect. In markets with strong network effects, the value of a platform increases as more people use it. That kind of creates a winner takes it all kind of outcome. For example, if Facebook has 100 million users and a rival platform, say X, has 1 million users, the next user is more likely to join Facebook since it has more followership. Similarly, and I have a very little knowledge of this domain, but I think for many years, Oracle dominated entire enterprise database systems. So developers simply defaulted to Oracle systems when they had to make a choice. So in this capitalism, there is a kind of a winner keeps winning and smaller players struggle to survive. This is what we see in the form of like the big seven companies: Amazon, Apple, and Meta, and Tesla, and those things. And that is one of the reason why we see such extreme concentration of wealth in digital markets. Now with that historic background, we can talk more intelligently about the defense and critique of capitalism. One key point is that both defenses and critiques are often contextual. Different countries are at different stages. The United States is not Nepal, Saudi Arabia is not Malaysia. And capitalism has also evolved and changed over a period of time. Capitalism in 1870 is not the same capitalism that we see in 2025. However, many arguments for in for and against capitalism are made as if they were universal and timeless. Critics often use frameworks developed for 19th century industrial capitalism and apply them directly to 21st century welfare state capitalism. And then defenders sometimes use success stories from rich countries and then impose the same policies on the poor countries with very different condition as the free market advocate of IMF did in 1980s and 90s. And we can also see examples like Karl Marx's original critique was written in a context with no welfare state and very little labor protection. It does not map now into current modern Western European capitalism, where there are a lot of safety nets, unions, and social programs. On the other hand, in the 1980s and 90s, the IMF's pushed very aggressive free market reforms on many poor countries who were needing loans, and often they didn't pay attention to the institutional realities of these countries, which in turn caused further destabilization of these economies rather than helping them. So part of our job is to keep context, geography, and historical stages firmly in mind when we hear sweeping statements about capitalism. Another important idea that I wanted to discuss was that human civilization is always in flux. It's always changing. Animals can live in the same pattern for thousands of years. They know where to get the food, where to hunt, where to go for water, and they will live like that forever until like some natural disaster happens or climate changes or things like that. But human beings constantly think, they innovate and create new conveniences. So in other words, human mind is not frozen. A helpful analogy in this case would be the life cycle of a person. It starts as a baby which faces one set of challenges such as survival and protection from diseases, and then they grow into a 10-year-old, face another set of challenges like learning discipline and responsibility. Then they go into the teenage phase where they have to another set of issues related to identity, relationships, managing their own health and body, and preparing for adult life. And then we have adults who basically go into workforce, start a family, get married, and that leads to another set of friction, problems, and responsibility. So we cannot say that we have to freeze the child's age at 10 years because other subsequent years will bring problems, and it will lead to further like troubles. So we cannot freeze the age of the child. If we try to do that, we would basically be handicapping our own child compared to other kids. Similarly, human civilization moves through various stages. Each stage brings its own problems and risks. So saying that let's stay forever in some earlier stage is not realistic, and leaves a community where this discourse is popular in a disempowered situation. And I'm specifically talking about the Muslim community here, which basically romanticizes the medieval era and says that we have to aspire and for that period. The same holds for capitalism and technology. We can and should regulate, guide, and reform, but pure like anti-growth or anti-change position often translates into a self-imposed weakness in the world where other societies continue to advance, and the society which favors anti-growth stance basically is left behind. So what that means is human civilization is always in flux, human thinking is hard to curb, and human attraction for wealth will continue. You cannot, these things are kind of in human nature, that people are attracted to wealth, new things, and attracting more and more wealth. This is alluded in Quran and all the other human psychological books. So what that means is technology and productivity grows with time, methods and processes changes, mistakes will be made, lessons will be learned, and these lessons will be forgotten, so mistakes will be repeated again. And from this repeating of mistakes, there will be permanent fixes that come. Societies again, the means of production again changes, and this whole cycle keeps on growing. And it is hard to imagine that there will be some stopping to this process. Now let's look into the major critiques of capitalism. Let me summarize here some of the main critiques from different angles. Um, so first is the exploitation of labor. The core idea here is that profit comes from workers producing value that is greater than what they are paid. Wages depends on bargaining powers, and ordinary workers do not have much bargaining power. So it's like take it or leave it condition. And in many places, especially in smaller firms and poorer countries, working conditions are harsh, and workers have like no options to negotiate this, so which results in take it or leave it choice. Even in larger companies, the rise of super managers like CEOs which results in earnings. CEOs earn about 200 to 400 times more than the average worker. So, and it is hard to justify that a CEO's contribution is literally hundreds of times more than the productivity that is marginal productivity that is being contributed by a skilled engineer, and the pay structure is inherently exploitative. And global supply chain often relies on very low wages in underdeveloped countries, and the profit that is being generated is exorbitantly high. For example, Nike earnings billions of dollars and paying like few cents an hours to the workers in Nicaragua. So it's kind of inherently the globalization and the capitalism which operates in this globalized world is inherently exploitative. Then we have the inequality and concentration of wealth. Left to itself, capitalism tends to produce very large inequalities in income and wealth. Returns on capital often grows faster than wages. And overall the economic growth is kind of slower than how the capital of the rich people grows. So this creates a trouble here because people who already have a large amount of assets are able to grow those assets much faster and get richer quicker than those who do not. Those who start with small amount of capital will also have very small growth in that capital. And I think Thomas Piketty did some surveys on the endowment funds of various universities and found that rich universities tend to grow their capital much faster than the poor universities which have only got like say $100 million. They grow it at a much smaller pace than, let's say, the Harvard and the Yale, who have all like $40 billion. They grow that capital much faster. So what this translates it is into the unequal access to opportunities too. For example, the education system in the United States is very biased in the sense that the schooling system is much better in certain parts of the country and certain communities in certain states, and not in the other states, which leads to poor education for the poor people, and poor health care for poor people, and poor security like gun violence and other things for poor people, and also in terms of their lack of political influence to bring change in the society. So over time, you see there's these wealth inequalities, economic inequalities, results in an entrenched class which with rigid social stratification, people who are rich kind of stay rich, and people who are poor find it hard to move into the next strata. So social mobility becomes a problem here. Then there is the problem of alienation and commodification, which is capitalism turns many aspects of life into commodities. This is one thing that I want you to focus on. This is because of the democratization of opportunities. Earlier, people did not have, like, people who were born as weavers will stay as weavers, but now a son of a weaver has a chance to become but there are of course there are limitations, but there is a chance for them to become a high-tech executive. So what it does is it makes people to think that their talents can be used productively, and helping others might not take precedence in such an environment. People begin to think of every talent and every hour of their time in terms of money. Community, friendship, and care works are often squeezed in market logic. For example, let's say if I want to have somebody come and give a lecture, they will think, what's in this for me? Is there a social media exposure for me, or is there some monetary gains with this? So it's always has a market logic associated with the community work. In production also, workers may be disconnected from what they are producing, and they cannot afford the goods they make. This happens in many parts of the world, may not be in United States, but in many parts of the world. In United States, things changed a little bit after Fordism, when Henry Ford basically started to give out the cars to its workers. And then we have uh, an Apple, for example, give 25% discount on its products. And then we have the problem of alienation, which Mark has written a lot about. And later, Mark Fisher talks about how capitalism colonizes the imagination of people and the culture. And then the next problem is the instability, crisis, and unemployment. Capitalist economies tend to uh, oscillate between overinvestment and underinvestment, leading to booms and busts. And ordinary people who never benefit from such booms often gets into problem in the form of losing jobs in and during the bust cycle. And in the booms, they don't enjoy that much growth as the rich people do. So critics argue that this instability is inherent to capitalism, and that is problematic for the common people. And then we have many presentations here at Mind too, the environment destruction and climate change. And again, the problem is that people who created these problems, who gained profits from polluting the environment, are not the people who basically bear the brunt. For example, much of the brunt is now being borne by countries like Pakistan, where there is flooding every year, massive flooding every year because of the climate change, but they haven't benefited from the whole polluting, the increasing the carbon content of the atmosphere, but they are the one who are basically suffering. And then we have the short-termism and the financialization, and the both principals and agent often focus on short-term profits and stock prices instead of creating long-term sustainable investments and training workers and investing in green technologies. These companies tend to focus more on like short-term growth. The the financial sector grows much faster compared to the real economy, and that is the financialization of the economy, because the real brick and mortar companies grow at much slower rate than the financial sector. So this is kind of like creating a, Wall Street kind of economy rather than Market Street. Then we come to the political aspects of capitalism, which is it creates global inequality and extractions. It started right from colonialism onwards. The capitalism has been built on unequal exchanges between the rich and the poor countries. Resources are extracted from poor regions, processed and branded in richer countries, and then sold back to the same countries with a much higher profit margins. And the new patterns exist in this world, sometimes called as neocolonialism, where basically things are, again, raw materials are being obtained from poor countries, and the same product is sold to the very same country for very high prices. Then the capitalism also hijacks basically the economy. Instead of 1% one vote, we have 1% one vote plus a lot of dollars to buy votes. So the lobbying, campaign finances, and media ownerships allow corporation and rich individuals to shape policy in their favor. So basically pluralism boils down into elitism in a functional democracy. Then from religious and ethical critique, we have from Islamic perspective, there are additional concerns like capitalism can normalize greed, excessive materialism, and riba-based financing. And then interest can be very oppressive for people and poor countries that borrow in, say, US dollars and euros. For example, there was a famous financial crisis in which the Thai baht the Thai government borrowed in terms of euros and dollars, and when their local currency collapsed, they had to pay much bigger amount. So this is not just riba, but it's like just not the normal 3-4% interest rate, but it bounds to like double the amount of payment in the local currency. Um, so this result in a transfer of wealth from already struggling societies to rich financial centers. There is also a moral argument that wealth should be tied to real economic activities and shared responsibility, not speculative gains detached from the real economy. Okay, so let's quickly look at some of the defenses of capitalism. Let me summarize it quickly. Some of the main defenses that supporters of capitalism use are that capitalism is a tool. It's not a moral framework. It's not a religion. Capitalism is presented as a mechanism that can be used for good or bad. A knife can be used by a surgeon or a criminal. The moral responsibility lies in how the tool is governed, not in the tool itself. So, according to this view, the problem is not markets themselves, but weak institutions, lack of regulations, and corrupt politics. Then, like Margaret Thatcher says, Tina, there is no alternative or there is no better alternatives. Feudalism and centrally planned economies have their own severe problems in terms of stagnation, repression, inefficiencies, and a lack of innovations. Capitalism may be flawed, but alternatives they often produce worse outcomes. Then the rising living standards and the poverty reduction. So defenders point to the dramatic rise in the average living standards since industrialization, increased life expectancy and things like that. Many people who once lived in extreme poverty now have access to food, excess food actually, and education and health services. So the pie itself has grown, even though the shares of the pie are very unequal, are more unequal, and many poor households today may have higher income than the rich did in the pre-modern societies. Then the employment and dynamism. Capitalism is seen as the dynamic and innovative force. It creates new industries, technologies, and jobs which have not existed before. So yeah, this leads to boom and bust cycles. They say because that's the price of freedom to experiment, invest, and take risk. So yeah, that it will lead to boom and bust cycles, but it does provide a lot of benefits for these things to keep going on. So then they also point the ability to reform and embed ethics. Some points to the Rhenish capitalism in Germany and parts of Europe, where company boards include not just the business owners and business professionals, but includes representative from labor, environmental experts, and other stakeholders. And then regulation also forces companies to consider social and environmental impacts, and also like historical examples like Henry Ford paying workers enough to buy his car are framed as proof that capitalism can be reshaped to include broader benefits. So from this perspective, markets can coexist with ethics, fairness, and empathy, provided we design the institutions and checks and balances around them properly. So now we come to the question: reforming or uprooting. This brings us to a key question for Muslim communities and for all ethical critics of capitalism. Is the goal to reform capitalism or uproot it entirely? Reform means like having stronger regulations, stronger ethical constraints, promoting proper ethics in the society, building parallel institutions where possible, and patching and improving the system so that it serves humanity in a dignified way than what it is doing right now. Uprooting means rejecting the entire framework of capitalism and attempting to build a fundamentally different system, which at least for now doesn't have a clear and workable alternative ready. One challenge with the uprooting approach is that it's kind of an unimaginary thing, is that capitalism today is enormous and monstrous in scale, and secondly, it is very highly adaptive. It is like trying to manually uproot a huge, deeply rooted tree. And it's also very plastic. It absorbs criticism, even monetizes on the opposition and reinvents itself. For example, the movies that harshly criticizes capitalism and shows how evil it is are often funded and distributed and profited by the same companies who operate in capitalism. The system actually, in a way, is not afraid of its own critiques. It often turns critiques into a product, and also and it also reshapes itself. If the criticism is become too enormous, it basically incorporates that proposed change and reinvents itself. So we are facing with a system that is powerful, flexible, and constantly evolving. In that context, I think we have to carefully ask ourselves, what is the realistic way forward? Way forward, like in terms of capitalist realism versus Islamic pragmatism. So given all this, I want to end this presentation with a set of questions rather than final answers. So first is, how do we acknowledge capitalist realism? Again, capitalist realism is like, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of the capitalism. The fact that capitalism feels like the only game in town without surrendering our ethical and spiritual principles, how do we manage it? And is it even possible to manage it? And then secondly is, how do we practice an Islamic pragmatism that engages with the system, uses its tool wisely, and pushes for a just and fair society, rather than treating into some sort of slogan that capitalism is designed to fail us, or impossible demands from it, that all the rich give away their wealth to the poor. So these are kind of unpragmatic and impossible demands. And then where are the spaces for genuine reforms, regulation, and alternative institutions that can make real difference in people's life? So if we can simplify this, and basically that will be the path forward for Muslims. But if we simply refuse to participate in the system altogether, we may end up like a parent who refuses to let their child grow beyond 10-year-old, while other children move forward to become productive adults, enjoying ups and downs of life, whereas our 10-year-old child lives in a monotonous world. But if you on the other hand, if you participate blindly, we're just being absorbed and losing all our ethical values. So the task is to think clearly, learn deeply, and work together to shape capitalism in a way that is more just, humane, and aligned with our values, rather than either worshipping it or imagining and wishing and praying that it be destroyed. So this is my personal opinion. I'm way past my time right now, so I will stop here, and we can open the floor for discussion.